you expecting a response?
Yeah, it sort of was. That's how conversations go. Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Stuart Welsh.
Good afternoon, Kieran. It's nice to be back again.
It's great to have you back, Stuart. Like I said, always say, long time no see, but when I do see it is really always enjoyable. We're going to explore curricula, when to change, when not, and various other things to do with the decisions that school leaders might be thinking about. But first, Stuart, what you reading for?
Hey, what you reading for?
Well, Kieran, I have been dipping back into a book that I bought a number of years ago. In fact, something I bought almost at the beginning of my teaching journey. For anyone that's actually viewing, here it is here. It's The Calculus Story, A Mathematical Adventure by David Acheson. And I think it's actually quite relevant for our conversation on curriculum today, because this is a great book that has sort of multiple purposes. It's not just an introduction to the sort of technical side, the mathematical side of calculus, but it also gives a really rich historical context. And I think a lot of us will know Newton, Leibniz, and the sort of calculus wars, etc. But it's just lovely to hear all that deep history. And the beauty about this book is that it isn't just about calculus. There's so many lovely little results and surprising little outcomes that calculus has produced for us. So I think this is a really important book because it's rich in subject knowledge, the sort of knowledge that students should be exposed to. And so teachers, when they're moving through to prepare students for calculus or teaching them calculus, to be able to enrich it with the kind of the story that's woven through this branch of mathematics, but also so many other branches of mathematics, it's only going to increase the kind of awe and the wonder and that appreciation for mathematics as a discipline and as a sort of contributing factor to our own history. So great book, The Calculus Story, A Mathematical Adventure by David Acheson. What about you, Kieran? What are you reading for?
That sounds fascinating. I'm going to borrow it next time I'm over. Hopefully you'll finish it by then. I just started listening to an audiobook. It's Sam Friedman's Field State. I think it was published yesterday or released yesterday. And it's about how we got to the point where not much in Britain really works and how we can perhaps fix it over the coming year. So reasonably well-timed release for this one. And, anything Sam writes is worth reading, worth paying attention to. And so far, this is no exception. But I'm looking forward to it. I think it's 6 hours in total, so I'll probably have finished it by the time this episode goes out. So the title of this episode, Stuart, refers to the idea that quite often school leaders, their minds can turn to a change of curriculum, perhaps when things aren't going well or when outcomes aren't where they want them to be. But regularly people will ask me, what should I change to? And I think it's important to sort of state from the start that we're sort of scheme agnostic in this chat, or curriculum agnostic, and almost come to a point from our personal experience. Now, I think always makes sense to start with definitions. So we're going to use the word curriculum, but what do we mean when we use it? Because I think it can encompass quite a lot of things.
You're absolutely correct in terms of curriculum being sort of viewed in different ways by different people. And I think we'll get into the meat of why schools make the decision to change a little bit later on. But defining curriculum is very, very important. And I've spent some time talking with teachers and doing this exact task. And it's really, really interesting to hear the variety of responses you get when you say to a group of teachers, tell me what you think is a definition. Can we come up with a definition of curriculum? And so I've looked at this over the years, over the last 120 odd years, and way back at the early 1900s, John Dewey was talking about curriculum, and I've got it noted down here, being a continuous reconstruction, moving from the child's present experience out into that represented by the organized bodies of truth that we call studies. The various studies are themselves experience. Beautifully phrased from Dewey there. Quite hard to really pin down what that definition means, but I do like this idea of a continuous reconstruction. But as we go through the decades in the 1900s, the definitions change a little bit. 1957, the curriculum is all the learning experiences planned and directed by the school to attain its educational goals. Now that, for me, hints at something more formal, something more kind of clearer and more prescriptive, perhaps. And again, toward the end of the 1900s, we've got McBride and Brandt in 1997. Curriculum refers to a written plan outlining what students will be taught, so a course of study. Curriculum may refer to all the courses offered at a given school or all the courses offered at a school in a particular area of study. And then just the final one I want to share here before we sort of talk about these is the Indiana Department of Education in 2010. Curriculum means the planned interaction of pupils with instructional content, materials, resources, and processes for evaluating the attainment of educational objectives. And I think that last one is huge, really. That's now saying it's not just a list of what they're to learn, it's a detailed description of how that's to be conveyed and the materials that to work on. And in there in curriculum, there's also some measure of checking progress and recording attainment. So really sort of interesting, I think, evolution of some of the kind of key figures in education and the way that they've defined curriculum. So it does leave me in my mind with some sort of definition that I could go for, but I think I'd like to hear first of all what your thoughts are.
I like where the University of Indiana are going with that, because when I use the word curriculum, it typically refers to a broad set of component parts, where, it's everything working in tandem towards this one goal, of pupils being better at mathematics than they were when they started the journey through this curriculum. And so, I like how that's evolved. And I think that certainly whenever I use the word, it can mean many, many things. And that's probably not helpful. And it probably, requires a little bit more specificity in certain contexts and in certain situations. But if we're talking about this unit, this thing, then curriculum is almost, we've always said it's not just a list, but it's the pedagogy that comes with it. It's the tools that teachers have that are supported by the structuring of the questions and the presentation of the materials and stuff like that there.
Well, I think we're going to pretty much agree on this, but just to backtrack to something that you said there reminds me of a point that was made by my friend Chris McGrain a while back. And he basically just said a curriculum is more than a list of textbook chapters. And I've worked in schools where the curriculum has been a list of textbook chapters. And we're going to maybe get into textbooks a little bit later on. But what always sort of surprised me, but doesn't surprise me now, is that they were never taken in sequence. Every department, every head of department seemed to think, in this department, I need to start with chapters 1 and 2, but then skip to 5 and do 7 and then go back to 3. And I just have this picture of every single department doing a slightly different sequence. And my question would be, why? And is there a correct sequence in there? But if we're viewing curriculum in that much broader sense, which I think we should, then I would see curriculum as being the plans that we're making for guiding learning through the school and through the subject, and also the realization of those plans in the classroom and the interaction of pupils with the content and resources. So that ties in with what you said about the materials and the delivery. And then also I think the curriculum should be quite explicit in the knowledge and the understanding that is gained by pupils. And I suppose that leads us to the different types of curriculum. You've got the sort of the planned curriculum, that everything that we want to do with this group of students, and then you've got the enacted curriculum. So that's where teachers sort of take their interpretation of what has been given to them as a curriculum, and then that's what they teach. But do they teach it all? Do they interpret it in the way that it was intended? And then you've got the received curriculum, because as we know, students are sort of half asleep and not paying attention. So all the way through this process, we're probably losing bits. Things are falling off the side, and then you've got the kind of the sort of remembered curriculum. So what actually sticks with the students at the end of the day. So it's really important to think about that. We might have the best looking, all-encompassing, fully resourced curriculum. As we go through those steps in the cycle, and again, as you said, teachers and the way that they deliver and check the delivery of the curriculum, that's so important, because if we get to the end of that chain and the students only remembering 20%, then we need to reevaluate our approach to curriculum.
It certainly shows what we should be thinking about when we're thinking about what we have in place in school. And obviously, the idea of the intended, the enacted, the received, and the remembered, that transfers across many different disciplines, many different subject areas. So colleagues thinking about their history curriculum will have similar concerns. But I think in mathematics, like you said, that jumping around, that back and forth, because things depend so heavily on things that came before, I think there's almost like an extra layer of, I don't know if urgency is the right word, but you want to make sure that you've thought through what that journey looks like from start to finish. If you go to 3 form entry school, you want all pupils to have the same experience and certainly have the same opportunities as everyone else. It shouldn't be, because I'm pretty sure Dylan Williams shared a paper where actually the biggest variance wasn't between schools, but it was between different classes within the same school or something along those lines. I'll need to find it, see if I can link it. But, you want to guarantee that no matter who you've got for your teacher this year, the class who are adjacent to you, everyone's getting the same high quality deal, the best possible mathematics education. And I think it's just extremely important, because we know that if things go wrong, or not even go wrong, if the foundations aren't laid early on, then that has a massive impact on what happens later on. I was reading a paper which was published recently where they said that the sort of learning gains made in the first couple of years of school, as pupils come into reception and year one, they're a really, really good predictor of what happens at the end of high school, so at the end of secondary school. And, obviously, to be fair to these guys, lots of people make these claims, and I always take them with a pinch of salt, but they also outlined here the things that we couldn't control for instance, the type of instruction those pupils received. But I think the study was robust enough to suggest that actually, there's some really important stuff going on there. And I think that impacts curriculum, because, and mathematics in particular, because there are other subjects where the grammar isn't as linear, and you can do this and that, and obviously the connections you make between the different sort of themes will really benefit pupils, but it's not always essential. So I'm totally with you there. And I think when we think of curriculum, and when we are going to discuss curriculum in this episode, we're definitely thinking about the sum of many parts, and the sort of the ways that we can help pupils make sense of mathematics, which is ultimately, I think, the goal. So with that in mind, quite often when a change is required, the curriculum or the resources that a school is using can have their head on the post before other things. Is there ever a time when we should change curricula, or we should consider making changes to the curriculum available to our pupils?
I was sort of smiling there as you were saying that curriculum's neck is maybe sometimes on the block ahead of other things. And that phrase, sort of baby with the bathwater, was going through my head. It can be relatively easy to just say, let's get a new textbook. Let's switch up the curriculum, change the scheme, rather than perhaps tackle some of the deeper rooted issues about why things are not, as you said earlier, going well. And I think we can probably dig into that a little bit later. Your question was, is it ever appropriate, or is there ever a time when we should be changing a curriculum? And right now, my stance on this is yes, it is. Because I think that although we're talking about a body of knowledge in mathematics that largely hasn't changed for hundreds of years, really, I think a curriculum needs to have some mechanism in it to be self-checking, to make sure that it is having the desired result, the desired outcome. And one of the major outcomes for schooling is to prepare students for life after school. And we are living in an evolving and changing world. And a really great example, I think, in mathematics is data. And students in school just now need to be statistically literate, need to be able to interpret data, make sense of it, and make better decisions. More so, I think, than they have, at the end of the last century, for example, or before. And so I think that it is appropriate for schools to change the curriculum, but for the right reasons. And one of those reasons might be changing needs within society or changing needs in the job market, feedback from employers. It might not necessarily be that you always have to be freshening that curriculum out every year because you've had a meeting of business leaders and they said we need more of this. But I think there's definitely scope to at least evaluate the effectiveness of the curriculum for the desired outcomes for those students. And we have to also say that although I believe maths can be taught really, really effectively with essentially just a marker and a board, technology is here with us and does present a whole load of different opportunities, especially when it comes to dynamic sort of geometry type software. And perhaps if we're talking about curriculum as being more than just a list of outcomes, about being also resources and experiences, then yes, we should be looking at integrating technology and other digital solutions if they're going to help build deeper understanding, deeper conceptual understanding. It's also the case that year after year, certainly my experience of my early career in Scotland, when end of year exams were done, the principal assessor, the head of the exam body or board, would produce a report, and you could predict what would be in it. Children are still no good at this, that, and the next thing. They don't get better at the same things. And so then maybe we do look at curriculum and we say, well, where are we introducing this? Is it too early? Is it too late? What comes before it? Can we make some structural changes, not necessarily content changes, but structural changes, which may well have the effect of reducing those gaps or those deficiencies in student attainment. I don't think we should be changing curricula every time a new political party comes into power, because education is a big thing in politics. People think that parties should be improving education. That's definitely true, but it doesn't necessarily mean let's whip out the old and bring in a brand new curriculum, spend millions on writing one, when those resources, that money and the time might be better spent in improving the quality of teaching, the delivery of that curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I mean, obviously we're focusing our attention on the sort of the curricular decisions that school leaders that have control of, and because I assume that for most of the big providers, the option would then be to update with reference to the new national expectations, wouldn't it? And I mean, for me, I think you've got to make sure that it's the sequence or the resources that are the issue, and you can only really do that through testing them for an extensive period of time, because a lot of the first year of using something new is just getting used to it. Then you get to see it in year two, say you get to see it in action, and then year three you can really start reflecting on, actually, is this what we want? Is this what we hope for our pupils? Because I think I mentioned in Thinking Deeply About Primary Mathematics in a few of the webinars we've done recently, whatever you have in place should match up with your vision for mathematics and how it's enacted in the school. And so almost the pedagogic model that gets attached to whatever you've got in place needs to ultimately end up with the behavior of your teachers and the experience of your pupils aligning with what you want, and what you hope mathematics can look like. And we need to make sure that our teachers are in the position where they're equipped to deliver on that too. And so I also say that the CPD that goes along with any new sort of curriculum introduction, any new textbook introduction, is probably more important, because if you go to every state in America, if you go to every country in the world, they have a slightly different take on the sequence, the scope, the depth to which mathematics will go, or to which the mathematics curriculum will go. So, there are many, many ways to skin that proverbial cat. But if our teachers are equipped with effective professional development, it shouldn't really matter what they're using, because the guiding principles will allow them to navigate. And teachers saying, "Oh, I'm doing this because," not "I'm doing this because it's on page 53 or because it's on the slideshow today." You want teachers to have that level of agency over the decisions they make in the classroom. And so I often talk about how the sort of the most experienced and deep thinking teachers I've worked with, doesn't really matter what it says in the resources. They've lived that lesson so many times that actually they know which direction they're really going to go. They know where they need to end up to get ready for the next point in the sequence, but you can use that expertise to navigate through. And so you've almost got this, there may well be times when it's necessary to change, but I think there are a lot of other things you got to make sure are in place first. Not one of those being time, and the other being expertise across the staff body, and to the point of time. I think rolling out gently and slowly, rather than a wholesale change, is probably your best friend, because then you give people really time to assimilate. And then after 7 years, you can see what the experience has been like for those people who started off at the very beginning. But that's not often how we work in education, even though really it should be.
I think you're right, because there are two levels at which curriculum might change. And so focusing here on what schools can do is probably more helpful for our listeners, rather than sort of higher level government type decisions. And I lived and worked through quite a large curriculum change throughout my career, moving to some extent from what was quite a prescriptive curriculum, where there was quite a high level of detail in what was to be delivered, to something that was much more kind of open and vague and a bit more sort of experiential almost. And the theory behind that, I think, was to allow teachers to be able to be a bit looser and to bring a bit more of their own expertise in. And that's really, really important, because you don't want to shackle a really sort of creative and knowledgeable teacher by tying them to a sort of narrow approach through the curriculum. But similarly, you do still need to help teachers who are perhaps less expert, or perhaps don't have that depth of experience and subject knowledge, and giving them those resources. So the point you're making there was really interesting to hear, that there'll be some teachers who are in a position, a state of their career where they just know, you just feel it, what's gone before, where you need to get to, and you can chart that path almost on the fly as the group that you're working with start to meet the new ideas. But that stuff should still be available in the curriculum for those who don't have that expertise. And that's where you can lean on more experienced, highly expert teachers to help flesh out that curriculum. So to some extent, curriculum probably needs to be designed by more than a handful of people. You need to be bringing in a lot of wisdom to try and create the best that you can. But the first thing that you said there was about basically, if you have a super curriculum with loads of great resources, and there's like so much thought has gone into the structure, it's really coherent, and then it's poorly executed, then you failed. So it's so important that we get the balance right. And I would go as far as to say, is if you have invested in your teachers to an extent that they're able to really accurately ascertain what the group in front of them know, and know what to do about that, and know how to move them forward from their sort of current level of their knowledge to the desired level. If you've really invested in teachers that can have those skills, then maybe you don't need to sort of spend so much time and money and energy on the curriculum, because you've got this really powerful sort of workforce, these teachers that are able to work within and around the curriculum that is laid out in front of them.
If someone is considering changing their curriculum, they probably have spent a lot of time. I mean, you'd hope they would have spent a lot of time whenever they were bringing it in, or certainly someone would have analysing it for high quality and sort of saying, okay, what does this tell me about how mathematics will look? Now, obviously, you've written textbooks in the past. I mean, secondary textbooks, but I think the principles generalize. What sort of things should they be looking for in terms of ascertaining the quality of the resources they have available to them? It might be a new maths lead's come in and gone, actually, this doesn't feel right. What sort of things should they be looking at if they're thinking, okay, maybe a change is necessary?
And it's worth probably just picking up on that kind of textbook idea. So certainly when I was at school, the textbook was my curriculum. It really was, page 1 to page 350. And for quite a lot of my maths lessons, I was just sort of left to just work through the thing. And that was actually fine. I really enjoyed that. And that textbook had a lot of features that you don't always see in every textbook. And I think it's important to sort of create a distinction between a sort of textbook which is rich in sort of additional knowledge and explanations and is almost the curriculum itself. You know, the textbook and the curriculum you could see potentially interchangeable here. And on the other side, you've got like a practice workbook or something, which is purely just pages of calculations for trying to achieve fluency. And I think a lot of books have tried to be both and failed. You know, we know that fluency, automaticity, practice, those things are so important. But in some of the really rich textbooks that I've encountered, and particularly in international schools that are maybe following the International Baccalaureate, those books are huge and they're so full of wonderful stuff. There's barely any practice in them because there just isn't space. It's just all explanations, historical notes, investigations, things that you can try and do. There's no practice. So you need to, you know, keep that distinction in mind. But for me, I think, you know, a really great textbook potentially is something that a student could sit with. You know, a reasonably sort of switched on student with the motivation could sit and work through themselves. And so for that, you know, it needs to be structured. It needs to go from the simple to the complex, because potentially you're not going to have an additional expert coming in and helping you. So simple to complex, we must make sure that there's a sort of element of prerequisite checking. So in the way this thing's structured, not only have you met the prerequisites either recently or sometime in the past, but there's a way of checking, you know, are you ready to learn this new bit? Do you remember everything you need to get you going with this next new bit? And ideally something that is spiral. And we talk about that sort of spiral curriculum where we're kind of revisiting key themes in mathematics and deepening that understanding over time. And so this would not be a textbook where I would be saying, okay, you do chapters 1, 2, 7, back to 3, 5. It would be something I would want to be followed from page 1 to page 251, for example. And we talked to lots of teachers, you and I, and so often, and basically throughout the 20 odd years I've been in education, problem solving is just always comes up as an issue. Students are not good at solving problems, and so we want to try and have a curriculum / textbook, because we're now using the two words almost interchangeably, that really does focus on developing that critical thinking and those analytical skills. Now, it's not easy to do, but if we can start to sort of add a little bit of an investigative element here, or not just saying, you know, chapter 5 is Pythagoras, go away and figure out Pythagoras' theorem for yourself, but to build in opportunities to sort of see those connections, to form patterns, to then make conjectures, to sort of generalize, and then have a nice, perhaps some sort of proof there. You know, there's so many lovely proofs in maths that you can do from really quite early on with what we would call even primary mathematics. So many lovely proofs that a curriculum could hold and could use with students to help them build that deeper conceptual understanding, the kind of why this works. Because although you know, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, because you've got the primary background, but I believe, or at least don't burst my bubble here, my illusion, that younger students do approach maths with a bit of excitement and a bit of awe and a bit of, this is great, look at all these things we can do and I'm learning new stuff. And then somewhere at age 12, 13, 14 or whatever, they just completely lose that motivation. It's probably just coming to secondary school and meeting teachers like me, but the magic seems to go. And maybe it's because there's exams coming, everything gets a bit more assessment driven and it becomes more, you know, you need to know this, don't ask why, just learn this so you can pass the test type thing. But we want to fight back against that, because, you know, it's our duty and it's the duty of the curriculum to give those students opportunities to meet the glorious subject that we've chosen to teach. So, you know, I talked about opportunities for sort of building conceptual understanding and being able to conjecture, generalize, looking at proof. And I think alternative models, visual models in there. Something that I know from my experience with writing textbooks is that page real estate comes at a premium. If you can make this thing 300 pages instead of 350 pages, then that's great for production. So, you know, I think, and again, this is my impression, but some textbooks are lacking in, nice visual representations, or perhaps an extra couple of examples to show how this idea evolves, because it's just cost too much money. They wanted to keep the price tag of the book down and the production costs would be too high. You know me, Kieran, I like to chat on. And I think if I had free reign with a textbook, we'd be looking at 1,000 pages at least on these things. And you can understand that for sort of financial and business reasons. So we've got this sort of structure, we've got a little bit of problem solving. We do still need to have some practice in there. Now, whether you supplement your curriculum, your textbook curriculum, with some sort of online resource that can generate questions, that could be an option. But what you really want to have is a set of questions that are going to very cleverly sort of unpick the different quirks in the idea that you're teaching. So, looking to try and show the connection, show how things change when you double this number and half this number, look what happens. Or to really pull out those big misconceptions, so that the practice needs to be intelligently designed to allow students to sort of almost see for themselves the different sort of faces of this idea as it moves around through the mathematics. I mentioned it earlier, we live in a digital world, and so it may be that actually your curriculum or your textbook has got opportunities for some sort of technological integration. I'm thinking here there's a QR code in your textbook, you scan it, it opens up a well-known graphing software, and then you can actually start to manipulate a pre-programmed sort of graph or shape or whatever it is, and then you can do that along with the textbook guiding you through. Something like that, for me, is adding a richness that I know not all students get to experience.
There's clearly quite a lot of things for people to consider. It almost feels as if you need a team working on this if you're making this kind of decision. Because if you're looking at things like the structure, the pedagogy that's built into it, because not at all options will have that assessment built into it. Those are habits and ways of working that teachers need to develop for themselves in a lot of instances. So you think about the pedagogy, you think about the structure, you're thinking about the questions on offer from a range of different angles. It's not a decision you make lightly. And then particularly when you think about how much it could potentially cost you, you don't make it lightly, because ultimately, we know how tight budgets are across England, across the world, perhaps. It really is important that we do this right. So, if anyone's actually thinking about it now, it might be that you're thinking about, well, this is a change I might implement it in December 24/January 25 after some serious thought. Sometimes there can be really small differences between like you mentioned the representations there, Stuart. There could be really small differences. Sometimes they can be huge. So you've got to think on that level, about the representations. Which resources do we have in school already? Because it can be a big outlay. You've got to think about what you've got, what expertise you've got, and where you hope to get to. So I think it goes back to that. And so spending time looking at the different options. I always say that, free samples should be available, and if they're not, why not? And quite often, the skeleton curriculum is free of charge, isn't it, in most instances? It's the additional, almost that premium model that you'll quite often find. Although whenever you get into the physical books, different story, because obviously you've got a big outlay on the actual copies. So I think it's identifying what's important to you as a leader, what you hope mathematics will look like, and then what are the different specifically mathematical elements that are important, but also what are the pedagogic elements that are important too, and then almost trying to find the right fit. But it's tough. There's no right answer, and you'll go into two really high performance schools doing an excellent job teaching mathematics. They'll have two totally different curricula in place, and they'll have two different approaches in place. But really, what matters is that we've spent the time thinking about it, and there are no shortcuts, I don't think, within that.
I think that's really interesting, just to sort of unpack that a little bit further, because we're talking about compromises, aren't we? Cost is obviously huge. I suppose my vision for sort of curriculum and the resources is probably entirely digital. We have to, I think, be working toward a future where every child has got some sort of device with them at all times in school that allows them to access things, which hugely cuts down on production costs, and allows me to create my 1,000-page textbook. But there are elements within your curriculum and your textbook that are probably, they need to be there. They need to be very clear. It needs to be explicit for teachers. This is part of what we do, and this is how we're going to be doing it. And then there are other elements, like, for example, maybe additional challenge. So should your curriculum have for every mathematical idea some sort of stretch task or additional challenge type? The other way of getting around that, instead of building it into the curriculum, is developing your teachers so that they're all able to access a wide range of high quality tasks, and they know where to find them, and they know when they can get them. And to some extent that is still curriculum, because there's a resource thing there, but it's more about giving those teachers a little bit of freedom to draw in from a range or from a selection, rather than what's explicitly written into the curriculum. And the other thing that goes hand in hand with challenge is scaffolding and support. And I think that you would be looking at thousands of pages in a textbook if you were to start putting in huge amounts of scaffolding and semi-structured responses and all these things into every single textbook and every single exercise. And so again, that's where you want to be making sure your teachers have got the knowledge and the competence to be able to give the right level of support at the right time to those students. And so kind of circling right back around to what we said at the beginning, you don't want to just press the button on a new curriculum or a new textbook and then hope everything's going to work. It's a lot more complicated than that, and that actually you may well be better investing in your staff and developing their capacities, and then maybe over time leaning in on their individual knowledge and their individual experiences, and using all that, pulling all that together to create this rich kind of body of knowledge that we're going towards. Something we haven't talked about, but I mentioned at the beginning in what you're reading for, is this sort of cultural relevance of our subject, and why is it that we study it, and why does it matter, and where has it come from, what influence has it had, why is it important? And you could build all that into your curriculum, into your textbook, or you could get all your teachers reading the calculus story and then have a chat about that and say, well, where in our curriculum can we start dropping in some of these ideas? And I think the glory days of teaching, when you could basically just shut your door and teach anything you wanted, it didn't matter, are long gone. But that was a time when teaching it had that freedom for people to really sort of put their own stamp on it. So you get real characters who are passionate about their subject, and those people still exist. But I worry perhaps that some of that's been diluted by overly prescriptive sort of curricula that make everything a bit dry and a bit sort of lacking in flavour. And so that's something for maths leaders to consider, is how are we developing the mathematicians in our teaching staff, never mind the students. There was something I was going to ask you, because we've got different backgrounds, primary, secondary, and although there's assessment in primary, and it's different in different parts of the world and even different parts of the UK, it's the high stakes exams toward the end of secondary that are kind of the big ones. Those are the ones that give you the token or not to go on to the next stage after school. And so my question is really around, should our curriculum and our textbooks be created with those exams in mind, or should we try and stay true to the discipline that is mathematics? And depending on your answer, how realistic is it to be able to do what we would like to do there?
That's a very good question. I think there's a personal response, and there's a sort of based on the reading response. Personally, I think because of the political influence in national curricula and those national curricula leading to those examinations, we don't always get what I believe to be the highest quality journey through the subject. Previous incarnation, current incarnation, and I'm sure anyone who spent time in the classroom for long enough will have opinions on what should and shouldn't be in the curriculum. The people who listen to this podcast at the very start were probably sick of us banging on about what we take out, because it seemed like every couple of weeks we were protesting against having to teach something else. Examinations, because they're a political entity, because they are influenced by curriculum which features political influence, I think there might be like a 20-year job where all the brightest minds in mathematics education sat down and went, okay, what would the perfect journey look like? What would the space in between content look like? And then, almost, this is obviously a hypothetical in my mind situation, but you sit down and go, okay, right, let's test this out over the next 10 years and see what happens with it. But having done a reasonable amount of research or reading into what makes high quality curricula and high quality textbooks effective, the coherence between the local curriculum and the textbook or the curriculum, when there's a high level of coherence between the two, they are more effective. But that probably just speaks to the fact that if you're taught the stuff that's on the syllabus, you're going to do well in the exam, rather than if you're taught stuff that's not. But I think actually there might be even a third pragmatic answer. Key Stage 2, roughly 50-55% of the marks to pass. I'm pretty sure it's the same as GCSE as well, isn't it? Half of the available marks in the foundation paper get you a grade 4, I want to say, and then half get you grade 5, grade 6 in the higher thereabouts. So actually, when we look at these exams, they're not really testing all of mathematics, and we almost have to see the work we do on a daily basis as something more than that, and understanding that there are some things that are more important for pupils to know, like you mentioned, things that happen after school or things that are happening at the end of their big phases in school. If they know certain things, and I'm thinking number, operations, calculations, the way that the big ideas sort of relate to each other, well, then those exams are going to be a formality, so to speak. So maybe there's 3 different ways to look at it.
I think that it is right for us to aspire to a sort of system where school mathematics is as rich as we want it to be, and it does encourage the behaviours and the dispositions of a mathematician. But it doesn't. It should mean that students who have, as you said, seen those broader connections and got to grips with those bigger themes that are woven throughout mathematics find the examinations just straightforward, and they become a byproduct of a bigger system. But that isn't what we have at all. And having moved through a few different jurisdictions, different exam boards, and different systems, there are students in one jurisdiction who may get top grades in their exam, and then if you put them into the equivalent exam in a different system for students of their same age, stage through there, they'll get a completely different result and not do as well. And similar, if you swap them across, that'll happen because they've kind of been trained in the narrow scope or syllabus of their exam board that they're sitting, or the jurisdiction that they're in. So we don't have that situation where students are able to just pick up an exam from South Africa, an exam from the States, an exam from somewhere in Asia, or something from the UK, and be able to do equally well as it would align with the sort of expectations of their peers for somebody of their age and stage through the mathematics development. So we're not doing that well. I think it is almost a shame. I'm reluctant to say this because I feel I'm talking myself out of a job, but I've said it so many times now, I don't think it matters. But I think someday somebody's going to realise that we've packed far too much into our mathematics curriculums, and that there seems to be some race to get everybody at age 16, dealing with functions and dealing with surds and indices and things like that, which are really only useful for people who are going on to do more mathematical study. I like the beauty of trig, calculus, algebraic thinking. We could certainly do a little bit of those, but there's so much rich mathematics that can be explored, and challenging ways of thinking that can be explored with what we would consider relatively straightforward maths. that I think we've gone for loads and loads of content and then just grouped it into different sort of exams and then narrowed our focus on teaching them, soka toa or oil for expanding brackets or kiss and spammy. I'm going to go on my fractions rant in a minute. Because we've added far too much content, a mile wide and an inch deep, or whatever the phrase is, and not really developing any of the dispositions that we want. So then you have to ask yourself, at age 16, when they leave school, what is the sum total of their mathematical experience? A few sort of poorly remembered routines that they're going to forget. And is that really what our curriculum should be doing? Is that really what we want to aspire to? So, we could have another episode, I'm pretty sure, of me just ranting on about this. But we can do it well, and we should never give up on that sort of aspiration that we can develop a curriculum, but also importantly that we can develop our teachers to be confident and competent in delivering that curriculum. And I use delivering. I've used that word a couple of times now. We're not presenters. We're not there to cover the curriculum. Elliot Eisner maybe said our job is kind of to uncover the curriculum, and that's the exciting bit. That's where lessons go off on a tangent, and students say, "What about this?" And the teacher says, "I've never thought about that. Let's have a look at this." And that sadly doesn't happen at all. Really, there'll be one or two instances, but that's where the wonder still lies, and that's what we want to try and get back to.
As your line manager, I can safely say that you talked yourself out of a job a long time ago, Stuart. So don't worry about now.
Well, I appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, you'll get it in writing soon, I'm sure. Just whenever the HR department are on it. Yeah, always a pleasure. All that's left to do is say thank you very much for joining me.
Well, as you say, yes, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for having me, Kieran.
And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.